What is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we will be breaking down 5 must-start running backs headed into Week 2 of the 2023 Fantasy Football season. If you guys are new to the channel, all we do here is free fantasy football content all year round, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. So if you are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. Other than that, guys, please get in the comment section down below. Let me know how Week 1 went for you. It's always a mess. But regardless, any fantasy football questions that you guys have, starts, sits, trades, waiver wires, whatever you guys need, please let me know down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. But without further ado, let's not waste any more time. Let's hop into today's video. And don't forget, heading into the video, that we're not going over players like Christian McCaffrey or Austin Eckler. We are looking at players that may be potentially on your bench or kind of in that RB2/flex spot that maybe you're not 100% confident in. But in regards to last week, let's just not talk about DeAndre Swift. All right, first overall, I've got Ramondre Stevenson going up against the Miami Dolphins. This Dolphins unit is going to provide us with good game scripts. This offense is 100% electric. I talked a lot about this matchup between the Dolphins and Chargers in Week 1. And when we look at the Patriots facing the Dolphins here in Week 2, maybe I don't expect the exact type of game script, but I expect a pretty similar game script. I mean, the Patriots' offensive play calling actually looked pretty dang good, not like the last year or so. I mean, they kept up with the Philadelphia Eagles coming back from behind and almost, they had a chance to win that game against the Eagles. So I like this matchup between the Patriots and Dolphins. And the reason I've got Ramondre on here, who might, feel like a no-brainer must start for some of you guys, is the fact that a lot of fantasy managers still worried about that Week 1 performance because Ezekiel Elliott got pretty involved overall. 7 rushing attempts, 29 rushing yards, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 14 receiving yards for Zeke. He was on the field enough to spook some fantasy managers, but we have to remember Ramondre Stevenson was dealing with, a stomach bug going into this game, was listed as questionable. He may have not been 100%. He was obviously close enough to play in the game, and I told you guys I wasn't panicked about him going into the week, and he still had a good week. 14.9 PPR fantasy points, 12 rushing attempts, 25 yards on the ground, 6 targets, 6 receptions, 64 receiving yards. And he did that against the Philadelphia Eagles unit that is going to be good against a run throughout the year. But what's the highlight here? The 6 targets, the 6 receptions, 64 receiving yards. This is why we drafted Ramondre Stevenson. He is a pass-catching back. Don't be worried about him. This is a good game script heading into Week 2. He should be in your starting lineups as we approach the week. All right, next up on the list, I've got David Montgomery, a player we talked about last week going up against the Kansas City Chiefs, and he finished with 13.4 fantasy points, 21 rushing attempts, 74 rushing yards, and a touchdown. Listen, I like Jahmyr Gibbs a lot, okay? I want us to be relatively cautious when it comes to David Montgomery because at any point, Jahmyr Gibbs could start to take more and more and more of these snaps away from Monty. I expect that to happen. But Montgomery's still going to have that traditional 3-down back role within this offense. It's pretty obvious that Dan Campbell wants to run the football quite a bit. He had a good fantasy stat line in Week 1. I expect another competitive game script in Week 2 at home. First home game for the Lions against the Seattle Seahawks, who did not look so hot against the Rams in Week 1. And we already knew that this run defense for the Seahawks was not going to be good. They gave up 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 of them to the Rams' backup running backs. So I like this game a lot for Monty. I liked him last week. I still think early in the season, this is the time to have Montgomery locked into your lineups. He's a great RB2 or flex play as we approach Week 2. All right, third overall, I've got Rashad White. Call me a sucker. I've been a Rashad White fan all off season long. I get it. He had a poor Week 1 performance. He only had 2 targets and 2 receptions. We were expecting White to really be, a big part of the offense in terms of a pass catcher. It was a good game script against the Vikings, a good matchup. Gave us a dud at 6.9 fantasy points in Week 1, but I expect him to be much better at home in Week 2 against a Bears defense that just got completely decimated by Jordan Love and company. Aaron Jones ran all over this defense. The running game looked great against this defense. I expect the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who kind of feel like a little bit of a sleeper, sweetheart story type team. Early in the season, we'll see how things play out with Baker at quarterback to play well here in week 2 at home. I think Rashad White will give us a much better stat line overall. I'm expecting things to be better. I get it. If you have other options who you're more confident in, maybe you roll with them. But if you don't, and you drafted Rashad White as your RB2 or maybe your RB3, and you're not so confident in the other RB2 on your team, I do think Rashad White is a solid play. Let's not overreact completely to week 1. Let's give him one more shot against a very poor Bears defense in week 2. All right, 4th overall, I'm going to go with Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Listen, this was a very poor offensive performance, to say the least, by the Steelers in week 1. But hey, they were playing arguably the best defense in the entire league, maybe neck and neck with the Dallas Cowboys. After all things are said and done, they are playing the Cleveland Browns in week 2, who, don't get me wrong, looked good defensively as well. I mean, they made the Bengals look like one of the worst teams in the NFL. I get it. But Joe Mixon had a good day on the ground. Over 50 yards on the ground for Mixon, over 10 fantasy points in full PPR. I expect things to go much better in week 2. Maybe not for the Steelers as a whole, but for Najee Harris on the ground. Listen, the game script got away from the Steelers in week 1. They had to kind of abandon the run game. I expect things to be a little bit closer in week 2 against Cleveland, even if Cleveland pulls ahead towards the end of the game. This is a primetime matchup. The Steelers will get an extra day of rest. Ultimately, I just expect a much better overall game out of Najee Harris. The Browns, they may be improving defensively, but their weakest spot is still against the run. So Najee Harris is a lot of your guys' RB2. Don't lose faith. Don't completely overreact to week 1. I think he is a solid RB2 flex play moving in to week 2. All right, last but not least, I'm rolling with Kenneth Gainwell, baby, a player I talked a ton about throughout the offseason. My most drafted running back and underdog drafts, mainly because he's my favorite late round pick and those start to add up. But nonetheless, Gainwell, a player I liked all off season long, really thought he was going to be more involved in this offense than a lot of people were alluding to. Don't get me wrong, I mean, I liked Swift as an upside draft selection as well, but Gainwell showed his usage strongly in week 1 against a good defensive unit in the New England Patriots. 11.4 fantasy points, 14 rushing attempts for 54 rushing yards, 4 targets, 4 receptions, 20 receiving yards. We saw Rashad Penny as a healthy scratch in week 1. We saw DeAndre Swift make me look like a complete idiot and get just about 0 usage in week 1 as well. Week 2, the Eagles will be going up against the Minnesota Vikings. I like this game script. I like this matchup. Should be a good competitive game. You know, this is a home game for the Eagles, so they should look a little bit more in sync as opposed to what we saw out of week 1. Not that they looked bad necessarily, but they at least let the Patriots creep back into that game. I think the Minnesota Vikings kind of in shambles after that week 1 performance and that loss. And, you know, we talked about this earlier. I liked Rashad White a lot going up against the Vikings in week 1, and the stat line just wasn't quite there. But I expect the Eagles to play much better than the Buccaneers did in week 1 going into this matchup. I expect Nick Sirianni to want to run the football quite a bit, maybe try and control the clock. So Gainwell, I really like moving into the week. Don't get me wrong, we still don't want to overreact to the usage we saw in week 1, but it looked very promising. There are still other talented running backs on this roster, and this is a unit that likes to kind of switch things up and utilize a lot of different skill position players, at least at the running back position, that is. But overall, I think Gainwell a solid RB2 spot if you're not confident in your RB2 or if you're desperate for a flex play. And if he's available on the waiver wire, like I alluded to in our must-add waiver wire pickups for the week, he is a must-add waiver player, so go check if he's available. Moving in to week 2. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did find the content today helpful or enjoyable in any way, be sure to subscribe on the way out for more fantasy football content all year round. But more importantly, guys, please let me know in the comments down below any start, sit questions that you guys have, trade questions that you guys have, whatever you guys need moving into week 2 of the 2023 fantasy football season. Let me know down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And with that, I will say, thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here. on the catch.